We've got a different segment this time, as you can kind of tell from the background images. This is all about Judea and Galilee and the time period of the first century when Rome occupied that area, much to the chagrin of the people that lived there at the time. I want to refrain from calling them Jews that lived in the area at that time. Yes, there were Judahites that lived there, but Jews, Rabbinic Judaism, really didn't come into existence until after the fall of the Second Temple, 70 CE, and that's one of the things we're going to talk about here. I'm not disparaging the Jews, I just want it to be clear that there was a significant difference between the religion of Rabbinic Judaism and the religion of ancient Israel. Quite a bit of difference. There's also some historical problems with the concept of what Judah was pushing, like in Kings with Josiah, and what existed prior to that. But we'll get into that as we go along. Our real subject for right now is the first century and the occupation of Rome of the area of Judea and Galilee at that time. Now, Rome was the power to be reckoned with in history at this time. They had conquered almost all of Europe, northern part of Africa, on over into the Middle East. And of course it was all about the ability to control trade routes and economics and all that, as well as politics. But they had a lot of trouble in a lot of places, but nothing like they had in Judea and Galilee. And what we want to explore is, what was it that was going on in Judea and Galilee at that time? Well, the Romans imposed their rule. And we can talk about the situation that Josephus, the first century historian, brings out, and some other historians, and other things that were going on at the time. But the bottom line is that the Jews that lived there wanted to throw out the Romans. The Romans were occupying it against their will, against the will of the people of the area. So we have this movement, and you could call it the Zealot movement, you could call it the Messianic movement. The bottom line is they used their scriptural religious understanding to try to fire the people up so that they would rise up against Rome in a revolt. So we had the Messianic movement that was very important, and of course it's not really the way we view it here in the 21st century, or even for the last several thousand years. The fact is that there was a spiritual program at the time, specifically amongst the prophets, and it was called the Hekkelot. It was a mystical spiritual experience. The Hekkelot is what drove the earlier prophets of the Old Testament. Hekkelot means chambers. Jesus kind of alludes to it in the New Testament. He says, "In my Father's house are many mansions." Mansions is another way to say chambers. A good hint that that's what was going on at the time. It was a mystical system. It had to do with reciting the divine names of God, and thereby entering what's called a Merkava vision, like Ezekiel had, where he got into the Merkava chariot and was taken up into heaven. Those are the types of things that we're talking about. Viewing, envisioning what the Creator wanted for them. This is what drove the Messianic movement, not just the politics, but the idea that God was going to be on their side. Now, what happened to the Hekkelot? The Hekkelot was a divine name used to get into the chambers. They would take a mikveh, which is very similar to a baptismal font, take the ashes of the red heifer, especially pure red heifer, take those ashes, put it in the water, then they would get in, that would purify them so that they could recite the divine names. After the destruction of the Second Temple, those things disappeared over a period of time, and they could no longer utter the divine names in purity. So they had to resort to another system, and that became the Kabbalah. More of a general type mysticism. I don't want to say it was an impure form of Hekkelot, but it definitely didn't bring them to the same level at the time. There would be people that would argue that, but I think I could do that definitively given enough time. So the mystical system that was driving them at the time is the Hekkelot. They have a messianic mindset, but there are different messiahs. The two that we want to discuss here are the Joshua ben Joseph and the Messiah ben David. They're not the same person. Even in Jewish literature, Jewish legend, Jewish scriptures, there's a difference. Messiah ben Joseph, the Joshua ben Joseph, is the suffering servant who will die in the course of his mission. And then there's the son of David, the Messiah ben David, who conquers all of his enemies and rules the world. Jesus definitely didn't do the latter, not in the sense that the Jews look forward to it, and really not in the historical or the scriptural sense either, but that's been a point of contention for a long period of time. So we want to talk a little bit about this Joshua ben Joseph and who he was, and there is a person in history that meets those qualifications, and Pilate did crucify him, but not in Jerusalem. So that's another issue that we'll want to get into. Finally, just so that we say it real quick, Rome defeats the Jews in 70 CE, destruction of the Second Temple, Masada, that whole deal. They're the winners. They write history. Interestingly enough, there's a little council called the Council of Yavna that happens. The Jews call that, under the direction of the Roman emperor, and they come up with the beginnings of rabbinic Judaism. That carries on for several years, even up through the Bar Kokhba rebellion of 135, when Judaism, or I should say the old Israelite religion as it was known prior to that time, pretty much disappears, and rabbinic Judaism takes its place. Again, a Roman sanctioned religion. Should raise some questions in our mind. What was Christianity? That's going to be a big question. That's going to be a big issue for us. It's not what most people think. The martyrs of the 1st and 2nd centuries were likely not the type of people that you normally associate with Christian martyrs, but they're going to be Jewish Messianists by and large. Big difference in the philosophies and the religious understandings of the time. So you can see where we're going with this. I hope you've enjoyed some of the background here. Again, we're trying to give you a little experience, not just an educational discussion, but a little entertainment and something to keep your interest. These are supposed to be scenes from Judea and Galilee, of course, and the incidents of the time. They're really actually parts of a movie that we're making about these subjects. But despite the fact that they were filmed other than the Middle East, Judea and Galilee, I still think they give you a really good idea of what's going on here. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we're going to get down to particulars and all the different things that we've talked about, just like I said in the very first video with the stars, universal type of discussion. And thank you for coming, and I hope you have a wonderful day, evening, week, whatever, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.